Okay, so now that we have learned about component scan and component annotation and how Spring does all this managing of objects behind the scenes, now what's the whole point? Because my goal is to not write this useless code. And not just that, any other useless code that I'm going to write, because this is something repeatable and this is something that can be prone to errors for a programmer. I want this to be handled by Spring Framework. And with what we've learned so far, we can only do something like this. person DAO application context, get bean, and I can put my bean name, and then I need to class cast this, because by default it's being added by me it's being added by the Spring, and this is all I want to do, but it's not very practical because I want to just do something like this. So person controller, new person controller, and person controller just, run my method from here. So how does Spring does this? And to understand this, let me just go here. And what we've learned so far, we've learned the principle of inversion of control. Now, the actual definition is something like this. Inversion of control is a principle in software engineering which transfers the control of objects or portion of a program to a container or framework. Now, in the context of Spring, with the help of the application context, is creating the objects for us. So basically, we're giving control to the framework and not to ourselves as a programmer. But this principle is not complete without the other principle, and the one which is called dependency injection. And dependency injection is a pattern we can use to implement the inversion of control, where the control being inverted is setting an object's dependencies. Now this is maybe confusing, but let's understand this in our application. So in our application we have a person controller, and we want to tell Spring, hey, create this for us. But Spring will say, hey, I need person service for that. Why do we need person service for that? Because the person controller depends on the functionality depends on the person service objects. And then we can just tell Spring, okay, then please add person service to person controller. But then Spring will say, hey, I need person DAO for that. And the same thing. Okay, just add it, and then you can use person controller as you wish. Now, how can we achieve this? We can achieve this with the help of a annotation which is called Autowired. And basically this annotation will add the respective dependency to that bean. Now, Autowired can be configured in three ways: a field type Autowired, a setter type, and a constructor type. Now, let's just go to our code so we can understand better. So in person service immutable here, we can see that the functionality of our class depends on the existing of person DAO. If we don't have a person DAO, we cannot have a person service immutable. So basically we want to tell behind the scenes, okay, when you create this, I want you to add this dependency for me. So for example, if I go here and delete this and start the application, you can see I have an error, because it says something like this: parameter of zero constructor is required for the bean of type person DAO that could not be found. Why is doing this? Because behind the scenes, Spring is going to this person service immutable controller, and it's trying to instantiate an object like this. Person service is trying to instantiate this object, the constructor, and this object doesn't instantiate this object which we have added with the final keyword, and because of that Spring is throwing an error. Why? Because the functionality of the person service immutable depends on the person DAO existence. Now, to achieve this, we need to add the Autowired annotation, and this annotation would basically tell Spring, hey, when you create this object, please create this object also, which we have declared here. Now, why this worked without the Autowired annotation? Because starting from Spring 4, version 4, you don't need to add the Autowired annotation when you have only one constructor, but it's best to just add it for to be more clean and to be more easy to read for you and other developers. Now, this is a constructor based Autowired injection. So basically this Autowired will add the respective objects on which this class depends on. Now, for example, let me just create here a setter, set person DAO, and I'm going to put person DAO, and type this person DAO equals person DAO. So to do this, I'm going to remove the final keyword here so I can set this, and I'm going to just going to log this here. Person service set person DAO setter called. And let me just start the application. And let me just copy this, Control F, and paste it here, and we see we have 0 results. So this method is not being called anywhere. Now, if I put here Autowired and start it again, and search it, you can see that the setter has been called. Why? Because this is a setter Autowired annotation, and this behind the scenes will add my respective dependency. For example, if I delete this, and if I delete this constructor, and if I start now, you will see I have no error, and basically when the person service impool object has been created, even if we don't have a constructor, so we only have, you know, the default constructor that's been added for us by Java, behind the scenes, Spring will go to this setter injection and it will create for us. It will do something like this: person service new person service impool, and then it will do something like this: person service. Let me just do this: set person DAO new person DAO. So something like this it will do behind the scenes. So it will create the object and it will add my respective dependency. So this is a setter based dependency injection using Autowired. Now the field injection is the one where you add it to the specific field. So by doing this, it will also work, because Spring behind the scenes, it will create this person DAO for us and it will add it to our dependency injection. Now, if we don't have this Autowired annotation, it will also be added based on the default configuration, which is from Spring. Now, so we have field injection Autowired. Let's recap: constructor injection, setter injection. Which one is the best? The one is the best to use is the constructor based injection, because this way you are specifically telling Spring and yourself that the functionality of this person service impool depends on the person DAO dependency injection. And this is the principle of dependency injection. With the help of Autowired, you manage the dependency in your entire application. Now I have a task for you. I want you to go to person controller and add Autowired to the person service annotation. Pause the video and do it. Have you managed? What was needed to be done? So only this Autowired added here. As I've said, by default Spring adds it for us when we have only a default constructor, but it's best and it's good practice to add it anyway. Now, based on this, we can go to my first Spring Boot application and we can just do something like this: private final person controller, and then I'm going to type Alt Enter and add this to my constructor. And behind the scenes, the functionality of this class depends on these two objects. And these two objects are being added with this Autowired dependency, and behind the scenes, Spring will create them and will also with all the necessary dependents and subdependents that these objects depends on. So for example, I will uncomment this. Okay. Okay, so I will uncomment this. I can just uncomment this and I can start my application, and you will see it's no problem and it's working just fine. So behind the scenes, Spring has managed all the object creation for us and all the necessary dependency for us. So this is inversion of control and dependency injection in practice. Congratulations, now you know what inversion of control means, dependency injection means, with only of some simple annotation and how Spring manages behind the scenes.